Welcome to the Sideline Live podcast. Subscribe for more episodes and follow our social media at the Sideline Live. We'd love to hear from you. On episode 6, I'm delighted to welcome Eddy of Sportsperformancethoughts over on Instagram. Eddy is a performance coach and we had a great chat about his path to studying psychology and tips or methods athletes may use to help improve their performance. I hope you enjoy it. Hi Eddy, thanks a million for coming on.
Not a problem, more. Thank you for having me on.
Good. How are you keeping anyway with COVID and everything?
Not so bad, yeah. Just recently returned back home to Tyrone, so sort of just figuring everything out again. It's like moving back into a new country again.
Yeah,
So,
it's quite a different scenery from Canada.
yeah, big time. But home's home. It's good to be back.
Good. Kind of going back to your background then, and sort of like as a child and kind of beginning off with sport and with psychology. Did you play much sport growing up at all?
Yeah, I would have played Gaelic a lot. Gaelic would have been the big one, obviously. You know, small country village. Yeah, small country village in Tyrone. It's what your bread and butter. So that's what I would have played, like sort of structured sport, I suppose. But you always would have been playing soccer as well, like, you know, and I think soccer was also enjoyable because it wasn't, I suppose, structured as, you know, you're sort of like free to do whatever you wanted as well, but like loved Gaelic, and yeah, it would have been the main one growing up, was the big sport.
The big sport in Tyrone anyway.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then kind of talking about your psychology background, what sparked the interest originally in psychology?
Well, I was picking my A levels, and I was like, I want to do psychology, you know, just sort of had an interest in it, and
Yeah.
my sister had done it, so like sort of
Oh, okay, right.
would have
Yeah.
seen the odd book lying about and stuff, and we just flicked through it and thought this is interesting, and I literally had no idea what I wanted to do when I was in uni, and it was the time that Donegal had started on the come
Oh,
up,
yes.
and Jim McGuinness was the big man in the football circles, and it was like, obviously because you were following Gaelic, and Donegal for maybe the last 3 years hadn't really done much, and then this man comes in and he turns them
Changes.
around and makes
Yeah.
them sort of from 0 to 100, and you're like, and I was reading newspaper articles and stuff, and Jim McGuinness with his sports psychology background and all, and I was like, well, I'm doing psychology and like I like sport, you know, this is something that I could maybe do. And I had literally had no idea what I wanted to do at uni. Nothing really appealed to me. I was like, I want to go to uni, but I didn't know really what I wanted to do. And I think at that time that was sort of something that really influenced me. And as I started to read more and more into it and sort of look into other guys, I was like, this is something like I really am interested in, and I think I would really enjoy. So that's really where it took off from there then.
Brilliant. And you went to university in Ulster, was it? In
Yeah,
Belfast, is it?
yeah. So I went to Queen's University in Belfast, and I done my psychology undergraduate, and then I went to Jordanstown for sports psychology masters. Then just for it was a 1 year course.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
did your sister do psychology in college, or was it just for her
No,
A
she
levels?
she just done it in A levels, yeah. So that
Oh,
was,
okay.
yeah. So then she went on and done social work, which obviously has a lot of sort of principles of psychology in it. But yeah, I suppose that was sort of where I first sort of got the idea of sports psychology. She was doing her A levels at maybe 17, and I was like 12, 10 or 12, and I was like, you know, that's sort of the first sort of initiation into it.
And apart from Jim McGuinness, was there anyone in particular you kind of looked up to, or did you have a mentor at all in psychology or in that world?
Um, I suppose when I started to look into it, there was a guy, Dan Abrahams. He's a sports psychologist over in England. He's big in golf, and he's worked with a few Premier League teams and sort of individual footballers. And when I sort of typed in sports psychologist, like obviously I was like 17, I was like typed in sports psychologist. He's one of the first guys to come up, and some of his stuff, like his was the first sports psychology book that I ever bought. Was something that he had produced, and
Oh,
um,
okay, yeah.
yeah, and he was somebody, I suppose, I looked up to a lot, early doors at that time. And then also from playing football, one of the coaches, a guy called Benny Hurl, I suppose people up in Georgetown would probably know him. While he didn't have a background in sports psychology, he was very aware, sort of the key principles of it. And he would have, when we were playing football, well, we didn't know it at the time, but when you look back on it, he was employing a lot of those things. And as I started to get into, I suppose, the 17, 18 playing minor football, and I started to get into this idea of sports psychology, I could see those were the things that he was doing.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the other guys maybe didn't, I suppose, to say, sort of were just like thinking this is great stuff, but they didn't know that what he was doing, like, I suppose to them it seemed like madness, but there was method in his madness, And I suppose him as well, sort of from like an athlete, sort of looking up to somebody. He was probably, I would say, like the closest that I have ever sort of been as somebody that was playing sport that had somebody like that, I suppose. So I would say those probably sort of early influences on me, definitely.
That's really interesting. What kind of stuff would he implement in the training then that you guys probably didn't notice at the time, and kind of looking back, he said, "Oh my God, that's brilliant! Like that was amazing to bring in."
I think one of the big things that always stood out for me was he was able to instill a great sense of belief. We weren't, I suppose, a fancy team, and he was really able to sort of bring the sense of belief in that you boys can do this, and he was very much a man for it, I suppose, one step at a time. It was never about like we want to try and win a championship or anything like that. There, he was very much like, okay, here's the first goal is win the first game, and then once we get that, we'll go on again. Whereas before, like the teams that we'd played on, was like, oh, we need to win a championship this year, and he just sort of changed that. He flipped it, and he was like, just play the first game, and we'll go from there. And I think another thing was, and it was really simple, he would have done the hard training sessions with us. We were 17, 18 years of age, and Benny was probably late 40s at this stage, and he would have jumped in and he would have done the training with us, not the sort of football trainings as such, but more so like the hard trainings. We would have maybe done like maybe 5K runs and stuff, and he would have been doing with them. And when you're seeing him do it, like, and he didn't have to do it, like he was just there to coach.
He could have easily just watched from the sideline,
he could have just said, right boys, go do a 5K run there, but he would have took part. And when you see one of the coaches is doing that there, you're like, do you know what, this man's doing this with me. It really sort of, you want to do well for him as well. So I think that there was another big thing as well. But those were a couple of just like sort of off the top of my head that I can think of.
Very, very simple. Even just hopping in on a running drill, like anyone can do that.
Exactly. And like it was no bother to him. Like we were probably finding it tough, but behind the scenes he was doing his running. Obviously we probably didn't know he was doing his running, so we were like, oh, if this man can do it, so why can we not do it? That sort of thing.
He was showing you up. He was 10 yards ahead of everyone.
He was 10 yards ahead of me,
Brilliant. And then recently you set up your Instagram page, Sports Performance Thoughts. What inspired you to set up the page?
Well, at the start of the year, I'd said to myself, because I'd sort of taking a break after I graduated from my master's, and at the start of this year, I said to myself, I was like, do you know what, I'm going to sort of push this and sort of just see where we go from it. And then obviously once you start back to work again, sort of like the resolutions as such, you sort of can hit the back burner a bit. And then after the whole COVID thing sort of happened, I was sort of time on my hands, and I was like, do you know what, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. Like, let's just push this and see where we go. Let's see what people we meet, sort of see where we go from there. And that's sort of, I suppose, in a nutshell, that's really what it was. It was just sort of, it was, and I think as well, it was a lot of accountability, because I was like, if I start this now, maybe get a bit of a following, sort of people sort of would like to want to see sort of keep putting stuff up as such, maybe. And I think that was another thing for me, like once you start something and sort of people know, it's up to you to sort of continue it or finish it, you know what I mean? So I thought there was another big part of the reason as the way I set it up as well, and to learn as well. If you're sort of immersing yourself in that stuff, every day, you know, you're always going to learn, you're always going to pick up things, and you're always going to meet people who know stuff that they can sort of impart on you as well. So yeah, it was just,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know what you mean about the whole like keeping yourself accountable. I always think it doesn't matter the following that the page gets; it'll always be the content I want. But it's kind of nice when you're putting in so much effort to have you see the numbers kind of ticking up. You know, people are actually liking this. They're starting to follow the page and stuff like that.
yeah, exactly. That's the, like, just this bit of support on it, you know, it sort of makes you think, right, well, maybe, I suppose it's sort of like, it's like, oh, maybe I do know sort of what I'm doing here to a degree, you know, that there
Yeah,
kind of way. Like, so yeah, and like maybe if you put up something, you know, you can have a bit of debate on it as well. You know, you might put up something and somebody might say, oh, I think this way about it, and then you're able to sort of
yeah,
have a discussion. You get to see other points of view and stuff, you know. So it's things like that
totally.
there,
Yeah,
you know, like it's such a great way of, you know, like I think sharing ideas, but also learning new ideas, you know, it's, it
totally.
was
Yeah,
in
yeah,
a like simply, I suppose. Yeah.
yeah. And then kind of talking about the page and obviously trying to put the post together and kind of the descriptions and stuff. How much work would you put in during the week? Because I don't think people realize how much work there is sometimes on the back end of running a social media page and stuff like that.
Yeah, so like for a lot of the posts, you know, that would be sort of looking at, I suppose, like transitions, like sort of psychological or sports psychology principles. You know, some of them take like maybe 4 or 5 hours put together. You know, when you're looking through the
Yeah,
research and, you know, sort of seeing what's like, I suppose, the correct stuff to put in. You know,
yeah.
like I can take a lot of time.
The word, yeah,
Yeah,
sort of like the wording and stuff and the
yeah.
design, even with the graphics and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. It's like things I got there. So the goose things do take like quite a bit of time. But then there's other things like, sometimes like you'll be watching like a podcast or a video and you'll see something and you think like that's like really cool. That's something like what I'm about here. So like
Yeah,
literally something like that could take 15 minutes, you know. So just
yeah,
put that up, you know, and like it only takes me 15 minutes, but people can find it so beneficial. But yeah,
hmm,
like sometimes it takes like a lot of time. Then some things just come sort of quicker, more sort of by chance, you know, more than anything. You
yeah,
know, you're just watching
hmm,
a game or something, you see something, oh, that's pretty cool, and literally
yeah,
15 minutes has it together.
yeah. And then, is there any particular pages that you would follow either before setting up the page or at the moment that you just get so much value from and that you think should like other people should really look at?
Yeah, suppose on my, like before I started this, there was a page, Humans of the GA, like they put up some,
Oh yes,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, they put up some great stuff. You know, sort of like some great like quotes and stuff from players, coaches, and things like that. There, sort of relating to like the performance side or the mental side, or things like that there. And then also just like wee snippets, like quotes almost of stuff like, about like how the like how your mental performance affects your physical performance and things like that there, you know. And
yeah,
especially, I suppose, in Ireland where GA is the dominant sport, a lot of it is related back to GA. So like I think a lot of people can relate to it.
yeah,
So
totally.
I suppose for a page that I was following before I started it, they would be a big one. And then just I suppose a couple that I sort of found after. There's a guy, Justin Sua.
Hmm.
He's mental performance coach for the Tampa Bay Rays, an ice hockey team in America. He puts up some great stuff. He also has like a 3 minute podcast that he does every day, where it's just like a sort of
Okay, wow.
brief idea, you know. Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
like you can just listen to it in the morning, sort of something good for setting you off in the morning, something a thought for the day, you
yeah,
know.
exactly.
So he's very good as well, I find. And then I suppose, so the last one would be Amy O'Donoghue. She's a runner from Limerick, and
Okay.
she's very inspirational. Sort of practices a lot of sort of like the techniques, positive thinking, positive self talk, you know, and within her sort of domain of running. And like I suppose this year sort of proven like the benefits of it. She's had a great year this year. She's also someone that I would sort of that I've come across since I've started this, and she's great. I'd really recommend following her as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll definitely have to look into them. And is there any particular books that you've read that you've taken a lot out of as well? Are there any that kind of spring to mind?
Um, well, I was talking about Dan Abrahams earlier, and his book, it was called Soccer Tough. Like, it was the first
Okay.
at 17, playing minor football. It was the first sports psychology book that I'd ever bought, and
Yeah.
it's called Soccer Tough, and the principles are sort of applied to soccer players, but you can just take them and extrapolate to them to any sport, and that's what I sort of tried to do a bit when I was playing Gaelic football. Like, it was unbelievable for me at 17 reading it, because like
Mhm.
I was able to take a few things out of it, and sort of like I felt they benefited me. So I suppose for somebody that's sort of I suppose new in the idea like of sort of sports psychology, sports performance, and they're sort of looking at some basic ideas and like real
Mhm.
simply put, like it's nearly what I would recommend to anyone, that's
Yeah.
looking at something like that. Um, so I'd say that there, and then um, I suppose something maybe a bit more, um, I suppose related more to like what way to put it, like what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, like mindfulness, I suppose, which is like a big thing at the
Yeah.
minute. The Mindful Athlete, by George Mumford.
Okay.
He worked with guys like Michael Jordan, Dwayne Wade, Kobe Bryant, and stuff in
Wow.
the
Okay.
NBA. Um, he he was very close with Phil Jackson. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
so
The
he
mastermind Phil Jackson.
Yeah, exactly. So his book's great. It's sort of about the idea of mindfulness and how you can apply it to sports, but even even in life in general, And I think
Yeah.
I think that's important. People, I suppose, see sports psychology and they're like, okay, that's just for sports or athletics. But a lot of the principles apply to other aspects of life. Like, a lot of guys are called performance psychologists. These guys work on
Yeah.
performance. Whether it's in your work, in your lifestyle. I think the book's really useful for that. There, it sort of helps show the crossover uh, from like principles of mindfulness um, in sport, but also into other aspects of life. So I think
Totally.
that's
Yeah.
yeah. So it's a great read. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like one I have to add to my list. And would you practice mindfulness at all, or would you kind of recommend it for even just the general public, not just athletes?
Yeah, so I started practicing it there, I suppose, maybe 6 months ago. And at the start of every day, not saying every day, some days I just miss, but most days I
Yeah,
try to get it in every day. And yeah, it's really beneficial, like I find myself. But it's important, I suppose, to realize at the same time that if you practice your meditation, your mindfulness meditation 15 minutes, there's still the rest of the day. You still have to try and sort of use the qualities of mindfulness within everyday life. And I think that's something that I suppose if you're starting off, you can't forget.
yeah,
But no, I find it very beneficial. And for athletes, for people living their day-to-day lives, we can get very caught up in our emotions and things like that there. And I think mindfulness sort of helps us sort of be able to take a step back and look at an event as it is rather than what we think it is. And I
yeah.
think that
It
there
kind of yeah, it kind of like grounds you
ex-
in your situation.
exactly,
That's what I find. Yeah, and
yeah,
there's nearly no excuse these days. I know I'm terrible. I haven't done it in ages, but I had a headspace for a while. I think that's the name of it. But it was like a 1 minute like mindfulness that I just do on the bus or in the car or whatever. And it was like no excuse because it's a minute. Like a minute out of 24 hours is nothing. And I think we have a tendency these days to just say, look, I'm too busy, but then I'll watch something on Netflix for 3 hours. You know what I mean?
exactly. And it's funny you should mention Headspace, because that's the same one I use. And
Okay, yeah.
yeah, and I mean, like, it's so, if you can download, maybe you're sitting there, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do, I'm not sure how to do it. Like, I would recommend
Yeah.
Headspace. You download it, you get, I think it's 10 free sessions. So there'd be a
Mm-hmm.
guy and he'll be sort of talking you through it, how to do it, how to sort of work with your breathing and things like that there. And you know
Yeah.
like for me, I find it's brilliant. You know, because I think that is sort of the daunting thing for a lot of people when it comes to uh, sort of the idea of mindfulness and meditation. They think it's just sort of like sitting still, closing your eyes, and just sort of
Yeah.
seeing what happens. But there is a lot
Yeah.
more to it. And I suppose it's apps like that there, I suppose, that can sort of help you sort of give you a starting point where to go, and then once you sort of are able to know where to go, you can sort of use it to sort of tailor. I think Headspace has different things on it, where sort of
Yeah.
stress relief or help you focus and things like that there, you know. But it's just all about
Yeah.
sort of getting started, which I suppose is,
Exactly.
yeah,
That's probably the fear as well. If you don't know anything about it, you're probably like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And it's a good app for, and I'm sure there's other apps. I know Calm is quite popular. I'm
yeah,
sure they take you through it. Very simple, very easy. So it's good to kind of, for a starting point, as you say.
yeah, that's it. And I like that's all we're ever trying to do is just start from where we are, you know.
Exactly.
There's no point start thinking that, all right, I'm going to be able to do this in a week's time.
Do it.
Yeah,
Do a 3 hour mindfulness on day one or something.
exactly. You know, and it's all about baby steps. Like it takes a minute, and then you go up to 5, and then 10, and 15, and however long you want.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
all a process, you know.
Exactly. And something that's become quite popular around among athletes, or maybe it was always been there, it's just kind of been brought to the forefront, is visualization. Can you kind of explain to the listeners what is visualization? Because I think there's people kind of complicate it too much and kind of get confused to what it actually is.
I suppose visualization, in simplest terms, is just, I suppose, using your imagination. You know, the brain itself can't tell the difference between real life and the imagination. So as clever as it is and intelligent as it is, it can't. So you'll know yourself when you're visualizing something. You know, if you're thinking about something scary, you know, you change physiologically. Your heart rate can increase. You maybe you feel like your palms getting sweaty, but there's nothing there. It's just you're maybe just sitting in a room, you're just thinking about something. And I suppose visualization used in a real life context, but it does prove that it does have an effect. And you know, it can be used as a way of building confidence there, because the brain doesn't understand the difference between what's real and what's in your imagination. um, you can sort of, I suppose, trick your brain to a degree, by using visualization, of you sort of carrying out the techniques the way you want to, what you would do in a situation if something occurs, how are you going to react to it. So
Yeah.
when the situation occurs in real life, the brain can say to itself, say, well, this seems very familiar. I've been here before, I can do this. And you know, that's not to say don't practice,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah. I know what you mean.
because a lot of people think like, oh, maybe if I can do some visualization, I can slack off and, you know, my real physical practice. It doesn't work that way. That's the thing with a lot of mental skills. They're used in conjunction with your sport. And it's not just to say it's like, oh, I can slack off my sport, I can learn these mental skills, and that's me at the top of the game. It's not the way it works. It's all sort of, they all work together. But yeah, like visualization in a simple term is just using your imagination, um, and I suppose using as many senses as you can to get sort of as real a feel for what it'll be like on the day. And I suppose another thing, just to quickly mention about it, is it doesn't have to be used sort of what you would do when you're playing a game. Even simple things like you imagining yourself maybe walking out before a county final, because it's just something that come into my head today. Was I know a lot of county finals and stuff are going on around this time, around the country. I suppose there's Tyrone county final, senior ones next week, and you know,
Yeah.
the team in is Dungannon, and they have a lot of them guys wouldn't be sort of used to playing in a county final. It's their first county final in 34 years, so I suppose none of them's used to it.
Yeah.
So as minute them guys arrive at the park, like at the ground, I suppose they're going to feel a sense of nerves, which is normal. But I suppose if you're able to sort of visualize how you sort of you arriving at the park, you sort of walking out onto the pitch, when that like occasion occurs, you feel like, all right, I've been here before,
Yeah.
so it's sort of the idea that visualization can be used I suppose, for areas sort of not related to performance, but in the lead
Yeah.
up to performance as well.
Totally, yeah. I think I know what you're saying, and it's probably a pre-COVID times. Probably a good way of putting it is nearly if you're going to Croke Park for All Ireland final day, you kind of you picture yourself walking out to the pitch because you've 82,000 people screaming, and that's not something you're going to be used to training on a Tuesday night in February in a pitch in the middle of nowhere. And I know the Blue Sister documentary on the Dublin Senior Ladies a couple of years ago, they on the lead up to the All Ireland final, I think it was, they were marching around some pitch and the management team had Aaron Levine on speakers around the pitch to get them used to the sounds and to the songs and stuff like that. So you could completely ignore nearly your performance and just kind of focus on, like you were saying, the county final, the sights and sounds, something that you're not going to be used to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the big thing about visualization is to try and use all of the senses, because I suppose a lot of people sort of just think of visualization and they're like, okay, I want to sort of visualize me being able to kick the ball over the bar, and they're sort of visualizing the technique and all, which is brilliant. And it's a great place. Like if you're doing that, you're at least you're thinking in the right places. But I suppose try and bring more sort of senses in. Imagine what the crowd's going to be saying, maybe what other players are going to be saying, maybe the smells that'll be there. How you'll feel. Like maybe you might have goosebumps or something in your arm as you're getting ready you're standing before the free kick. Things like that there, because when you're visualizing, the more sort of senses you can use, the more real you can make the imagery seem in your mind. The better it's going to be for you later on down the line, because then it's real, I suppose.
Yeah.
And
the brain nearly it's tricked into thinking I've been here before.
yeah, exactly. And it's crazy. I remember when I was I think I was doing some module of sports psychology for my psychology degree, and I remember reading that and thinking, this is mad. Like, the brain's like so smart, however it can't tell the difference between the imagination and sort of what's real. And the more you think about it, you do know yourself, like you'll think of something, the body will experience physiological changes and your mood will change, even though nothing's happened. You're maybe just sitting on your bed thinking about something, and it's really like a simple but it's very powerful concept.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then something that a lot of athletes would do, and you were talking about before with your manager, is goal setting. What's the best way to sort of structure your goals and stuff? Because I have a tendency to over set goals and then I worry about not hitting certain goals and moving on. What would be your advice to people setting their goals and stuff like that?
I suppose for the starting point, I suppose you want to be clear as possible. I suppose when I'm working with people, I always try to say, try and sort of get your goal down into one sentence. What is it you want to achieve? Because sometimes you're working with people and they're sort of like the vague idea of what it is, but they're not really sure, and then they're sort of not really sure where they're going from there. So I think that's the starting point. I suppose you're not going to jump into a car and go somewhere and not know where you're going, unless you're just going for Sunday drive. Maybe, I don't know, but who knows where you'll, but who knows where you'll end up or how far you'll drive. But I think you have to sort of have a clear idea of what it is you want to achieve or what you want to do. Because then if you don't have that there, you're not working smart. You have to work hard, but you also have to work smart. And I think that's the big thing about goal setting, is if you're able to do it, if you're able to set goals, you can see what it is you need to work on and where to focus your energy. And I think, like, a lot of people work hard. Like, there's no doubt about that. Like I see people in my local club, and they're the hardest workers you'll see. But some of them, I suppose, like, just don't work smart. They're not putting their energy in the right place. And I think that's the big thing with goal setting. It can really help focus where you want to go, I suppose, when used in conjunction with other things as well. And I suppose the big thing I would say is write your goals down.
Yeah.
There's research been done. I guess Southern California University, and there was
Hmm.
people that had set goals that had wrote them down were 33% more likely to achieve them. I
Hmm.
suppose it just shows the power of having something out of your mind and onto paper, because we can
Yeah.
have things in our mind. It's like, oh, I need to do this, and you
You
notice
forget about it when you're busy. You other things come to the front of your mind.
exactly, and in simplest terms, I suppose, how many days is there where you're like, oh, I need to do that tomorrow, and you just say, oh, I need to do that in your head, and then tomorrow comes and you forgot completely about it. You just don't do it, Whereas
Hmm.
I find, if you write something down, you're like, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
That's in its simplest terms. So you
Hmm.
can see there, once when you go into the idea of goal set, when you write it down, and you see what you have to do, you sort of like unclutter your mind, and you're able to see,
Hmm.
this is what I need to do.
Yeah.
Things become a lot clearer. Maybe the goal that you thought was, this is going to be very difficult, this is sort of maybe insurmountable. Once you have it wrote down,
Yeah.
you can see the logical, clear steps on how to get it, and sort of gives you a bit of a confidence boost before you even start the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I followed the US women's soccer team quite closely, and one of their players, I think it's Morgan Bryan, she talked about before, she had her goals written down and she actually wrote them like on a mirror or something in her room, that she would see it every day. I want to go, I think it was to the World Cup or make a team or something. And she said the power of that, like, really not only pushed her in training but pushed her mentally to say, I can do this, I'm going to do it. It's I'm seeing it every single day.
Exactly. That's the thing. When you can see something wrote down, it is a lot more powerful. And I suppose also the research has shown, when you look into the brain, we have sort of, I suppose, in simplest terms, we have two sort of areas of the brain. The limbic system, which is sort of the prehistoric brain, it's sort of related to flight or fight, sort of
Yeah.
survival, and then sort of the frontal brain, which is more to do with logical thinking and things like that there. And
Mm.
I actually was looking at a study there a couple of weeks ago, and they found that whenever you set goals, you encourage the frontal brain and the limbic brain to work together. Where, because usually the limbic brain sort of can overpower the frontal brain, and that's when we work with emotion and things like that rather than logical thinking. But when goal being writing down goals and setting goals has sort of proven to work together, sort of to bring the two together, sort of to maximize your brain. So this is something that I seen there a couple of weeks ago, sort of related to goal setting. Sorry, I thought it was like, geez, that's really, that's something that's really applicable to what I'm doing, I suppose, or
Yeah, totally.
look.
And you could put that in any context, not just even sport. You could, if there's a particular, let's say, car, for example, that you wanted to buy, you would nearly put. I've seen people put pictures of cars as their screensaver, because you look at your phone, how many times a day, and they're seeing that car and they're realizing, yeah, I'm still working towards this. This is what I want.
Exactly. It's I suppose it's about putting attending your mind to the right things that you want, I suppose. And if you have your goal, what you want, and you're seeing it every day, you're attuning your mind to what it is you want, and then I suppose subconsciously, it's sort of tuning into the things that will help you achieve the goal as well, sort of uh, on a subconscious as well as a conscious level as well. So yeah, for me, goal setting, get it wrote down. That is the key, I suppose, for me when working with people. That's what I want. That's what I like to do when it comes to goal setting, is get it wrote down and get clear and concise idea of what it is you want.
Yeah, totally. It's like that analogy you were saying. It's sort of like the map. You're going off driving. It's like the Google Maps beside you. You have that voice saying turn left, turn right. It's guiding you along to wherever you want
Yeah,
to go.
exactly.
And then you spoke about it briefly there with your minor manager and him building confidence in you. How can coaches, start to build confidence in players? Because a lot of players would be, completely dependent on their confidence, and if they were off form, their performance would start to dip. As in, if they weren't feeling confident at training, they might not play well at the weekend. How can coaches kind of combat that and kind of instill that belief in their players?
I suppose the very first thing, if you're a coach, if you want to get the best performance out of your players, and I suppose seeing from what I've seen with coaches and players, what I've experienced as a player and talking to other players, it's all about trust. If
Yeah.
you're a coach and you have the trust of your players, you're going to get the best performance out of them because they trusted you have the right idea of what you're sort of looking to set out, and they're they've bought in essentially. And
Mm.
I suppose when it comes to building trust, it's about being honest and being sort of showing integrity. And I suppose a simple way as a coach, you could even sort of as a practical example, if you're a new coach coming into a team, you can sort of do real simple, by setting down some rules, but asking the players what the rules are going to be, so you're sort of encouraging, it comes back to, there's a framework, a theory, self-determination theory by Ryan and Dessay, and the three components of it are autonomy, relatedness, and competency. And if you
Mm.
can instill these sort of values within your players, you can build a level of trust with them. And I suppose in terms of the idea of autonomy, I suppose for this example, if you allow your players to be involved in the decision making, early doors, of right, this is, suppose, for example, okay, if you're a manager and you say, set out and you say, okay, players who don't train, you're not going to get playing. However, come the championship, all right, we're just going to break this rule. We're going to play the best player even though he hasn't trained.
Yeah.
Immediately you've undermined yourself, I suppose, just in sort of to use an example. Whereas if you set the groundwork, the idea with your players, and you say, "We want to come up with some rules," and the players say, "Okay, if you don't train, you don't play." You immediately don't have to. You have the trust of the players, and if they don't train, they're not going to play, but they're not going to get upset because
Yeah.
they've played a sort of role in the decision making, and they
Mm.
trust you that you've come up with this sort of idea with them and that you're going to carry it out. And I suppose that's sort of like a basic example, but it's the idea of just trying to build trust with your players to sort of bring out the sort of the best confidence or get the most out of your players, I suppose. That's something.
Yeah, and kind of involving players a bit more will probably boost compliance. Like if they know, right, if I don't go training 3 days a week, I'm not going to be on the squad, the match day squad. I'm not going to get my game.
Exactly. It's just that idea of sort of being clear and honest with the players.
Yeah.
If you set out a clear idea along with their sort of input, I think you're off on a really good start towards getting,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
just getting a good start with the players.
Yeah. And is there anything in particular that players or athletes could do to kind of boost themselves as well? Because I know some people would really struggle with confidence and need a lot of extra work. Is there anything in particular they should do, or do you have any tips at all for them?
I suppose on a simple level, would just be to sort of keep a journal. Um, after each training, uh, write down, say, three things you've done well and maybe three things you can improve on. Um, you'd be talking to players and be like, "Oh, I was rubbish tonight, real poor, and I did this badly, I did that badly." And I suppose that's just the way we're programmed as humans. We focus on the negatives. But if you ask a player, sit down with a pen and paper and think about three things you've done well, they'll be able
Yeah.
to tell you three things they've done well. Um, even if they can't, even the idea of you turned up to training, there's going to be men that didn't turn up to training. There's one for a start. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
and if you can sort of keep, I suppose this is like a journal of things you've done well and things you can improve on. Once you do this over 12, 24 weeks, you have a mountain of sort of work that you've done. You can take a look back over it and say, look, here's all these things that I've done well, and that'll give you confidence as well as here are things that I've improved on as well. So you sort of know like where you've come from as well and where you've improved as a player. And I think the idea of looking at things we have done poorly, it's not a negative thing,
Yeah.
just reflection. It's here's what I need to improve on. Here's what I can focus on for next week. If I'm a Gaelic player, my kick passing maybe isn't as tight as I want it to be. Look, I can improve that there. And I think for any athlete, I suppose probably they should be probably keeping a journal,
Yeah.
because it's a real simple way of improving your confidence, giving you some focus on what to improve on, and having something to look back on at the end of the season, or maybe at times where that little bit of self doubt comes in, where you're like, oh, maybe I'm not, maybe I haven't improved this. When you can look back and you can say, look, well, here's what I have improved. So stuff like that.
Totally, yeah. It's nerdy, not overemphasizing, but you are putting a focus on, right, I'm doing this well. Because I think we have, like, I definitely have a tendency to, I always think of my negative sort of reflections will always stick like glue to my brain, whereas I'll forget the positive things a lot quicker. Like, I can tell you a mistake I made 18 months ago in a game, but I couldn't tell you maybe something I did brilliant in that game. That one small mistake just sticks with me 18 months later.
Yeah, and I suppose like that's just the human nature in us. It's just to focus on the negatives, um, and I suppose if you don't have the positives wrote down, you will always suppose think of the negatives. Like, oh, I made that mistake in that game, and I made this mistake. Um, but when you're able to look back and see, look, oh, that's what I done well, and even asking the advice of uh, someone else, and it comes back to someone that you would trust. You know,
Mm.
would you trust their decision making, trust that they have your, I suppose, best interest at heart and things like that. There's like, what did I do well there? And what can I improve on? You know, there's that's another big thing, I suppose, is asking the right people for help, rather than people that are going to put you down, or even people that are going to build you up when I suppose they're just going to try and keep you blind to, I suppose, your negatives.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, reflection. It has to be a balance of looking at positives and looking at negatives, and looking at them, and I suppose to go back to the idea of a bit of mindfulness in a non-judgmental manner. It's just, this is what I've done well, and this is what I need to improve.
It's trying to strike the balance of you're not putting yourself down too much, but you're not putting yourself on this pedestal too much. Because I always think the higher the pedestal you put on, the further the fall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it.
My final question before I move on to the sideline seven: if you could have your choice and pick any team or athlete in the world to kind of be a fly on the wall for a week, who would it be and why?
Ooh, this is a tough one. I probably would say I probably go Roger Federer.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I think when you're playing an individual sport like tennis, and you've been at the top of the game for coming on 20 years, you've won the
Yeah.
most slams of all time. You know, I'd love to just see sort of like his routine, and the things he does, because within a team sport, you know, if you, I suppose, maybe have an off day or whatever, you can get covered as such by, I suppose, other teammates. But if you're sort of not mentally up for it, and a one-on-one performance, I think you'll always get found out 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
And I suppose it'd just be Roger Federer. I'd just love to see just someone who's been at the top of an individual sport for so long. I just love to see what he does. And I'd imagine if I did get to see it, it would probably be not very exciting. It just
Yeah, it's the
it's
simple stuff probably he
it's
does.
yeah, it's just the simple stuff. I'd imagine. And but yeah, still, even though I still love
Yeah,
to see him
that
tracking for a
would,
week.
yeah, if you had your pick now, that would be brilliant. It's interesting you brought up about kind of the individual sports. I remember, I think it was either last summer or the summer before, LeBron James was chatting to his son's team about, you know, players and being a team, and, you know, some of the best players who've ever played, you know, didn't start, and they played a role. And he was saying, like, if you don't want to play a role, go play tennis or golf, because it's you and you alone. It's similar, like we were saying, to Roger Federer. It's himself, and, you know, if he hasn't put the work in front of, you know, when nobody's watching, when he's out and performing in front of millions, he's going to get found out.
Exactly. And you know, if you as a team player, if you don't put in the work, you will have those doubts, and it will affect your performance. You know, like, I haven't trained this particularly well, or I haven't done particularly well. You may not play well, but your team may play well and
Yeah.
sort of come out the other side. But if you're an individual player, if and you haven't trained well, you more than likely doubts will creep in and you won't play well. But it's just you.
Yeah,
And
totally.
yeah, so I think that's so interesting. I think just,
Yeah.
and again, you don't have anybody to sort of, I suppose you have your coach, I suppose, to sort of support you, but in a team sport, there's players around you, you know, within sort of a close enough radius to support you. But in a tennis court, you know,
It's
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 just you, just
yourself.
you,
Yeah.
just you and your opponent, you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like in basketball, you know, you've four teammates with you on the court, but in tennis, I don't think your coach is allowed to say anything
You
from the
know, yeah,
sidelines.
your coach is up in the stands,
Yeah,
so it's
and
for
it
3 hours. It's just you.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. So we're gonna move on to the final part, the final segment, which is called the Sideline Seven. So it's the same seven questions to all the guests, so the listeners can compare their answers. So the first question I'm gonna go with is your favorite quote. Now I know you have a quotes highlight on your page, so if you want to bring your top three in, I'll allow it.
Well, I have one that's my favorite. It's from Angelo Dundee. He was Muhammad Ali's trainer,
Oh wow, okay.
and he said, "I don't work with fighters. I work with men who happen to fight." And I think it applies to all sports. And as a coach, you don't work with footballers, gymnasts, tennis players. You work with people. You work with people. You know, these people just happen to play a sport, and I think that's something that can often get overlooked. Is people think, okay, this person's a tennis player. I'm just going to talk to them about tennis. This is what you need to do with your tennis, and this is how you should train. But just sometimes we just sort of don't ask, how are you getting on? How's things? You know, that's a massive thing. There's a guy, Paul Warren. He manages Rotherham United, and he was saying, I want my team, my players to sort of look at each other as humans. You know, he said one of the guys had a child, and one of the players didn't even know it. And he's like, how can you not know that your teammate has just had a child? You know,
Yeah.
it's something that I think, as coaches, we should always look to sort of look at people as humans first, and then players. Because if something, I suppose it goes back to your mental health. I suppose, if you want to look at it on another level as well, if there's something going on in one area of your life, you know, maybe your relationships or your work, it's going to transfer over to your sports. Because you know, we have one mind, same way we have one body that transfers across all of these planes. So if our mind's not right for one thing, it's going to sort of seep into another area. So yeah, that's my my favorite quote.
And it probably builds the teamwork in as well. Like if you know, like not even with the coaches, just with the players. Like if you know, for example, like your man who just had a child and his teammate didn't know, like that builds a camaraderie because you're asking about, you know, how is he getting on, how's the baby, you know, they start to build that bond and that trust within themselves.
Exactly. You know, when you're playing your sport, you know, it's just one area of your life. When you're talking to people about, you're talking to your teammates just solely about sport, you know, that's just one area of their life. People have so many layers to them, you know. Again, like, they have their family, their friends, their relationships, their work, their business, you know. And I think it's important to sort of like find out that about people. What makes people. It's about what makes people tick, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because you know, it's just simple as we're humans first. We have emotions. We're not robots. We don't just go out and perform sort of sports skills. We we have emotions, and those emotions can often sort of affect sort of our actions and our performances. So it's important that we sort of look after them first, on a from teammate to teammate, from coach to player, player to coach.
What is the best sporting event you've been to?
I suppose it's hard to look past an All Ireland final.
Yeah. Which one are
Yeah,
you thinking of? I'm trying
that's
to think
too.
back to the last one Tyrone won.
I was see. Unfortunately, I was too young, and I never got going to any of the ones in the glory days. So,
Yeah.
but we're up in there. We're up at a couple of years ago, and Tyrone was playing Dublin, unfortunately, and
Yeah.
I don't know. Even like obviously the result didn't go away, but just being a Croke Park and All Ireland final day, the buzz sort of before it, and like the
Yeah.
expectation, and sort of like the anticipation, I like it's hard to beat them.
It's
And
true.
you're sitting in a stadium of 82,500, like maybe one of the biggest stadiums in Europe,
Yeah.
and you're for an amateur sport, I just think it's something else.
Yeah, I find it funny when people from other countries, they don't understand that it's an amateur sport, that these guys, they're playing an All-Ireland final in front of a couple of million on TV, 80,000 people in the stadium, and well, not maybe the morning after, but the week after, they're back working as a plumber, working as a teacher in an office. They're not raking up the millions like the lads across the water in the Premier League.
Exactly, and I think that's, I suppose, what brings so much to it, is because you can relate to these guys so much.
Yeah.
Like you're maybe, if you're a teacher, you're looking at a guy who's playing, and he's a teacher doing corner forward. It's like, I work with that man. So, like,
Yeah.
things I got there, and I think so. I think for me, like the All Ireland final, will always, I suppose, be top of the list. It'll be hard to beat. Maybe if I get to a World Cup final with Ireland in it or something, maybe.
I think,
But
yeah, I think
yeah,
you'd be waiting a while now. You might
I
Tyrone might win the Sam before that, hopefully.
I would say so.
Maybe not with Dublin in the form they're in at the moment. I'm only rubbing it in.
I'll let you away with this time.
Yeah. What is the biggest setback or challenge you've had so far in your career? That can either be sporting or professional, whichever you choose.
Um, I suppose when I was younger, I suppose I was 16, I broke my leg,
Mm.
and I suppose at 16 years of age, football is a big part of your life.
Yeah.
And I was sort of detached, I suppose, from the team for a good while and all. I
Mm.
was either worrying about, oh, will I come back and play, and things I got there. I was able to come back, and I was able to play um, on like a successful club minor team. So I suppose for me that would be my biggest comeback. So
That probably had sort of an influence with the sports psychology as well, because you were going through an injury, and it takes a lot to come back. Because I'm going through an injury myself, and I have those doubts at the moment. Will I ever make it back? Like, I know I will, but like when you're in the depths of it, you think the world's going to end.
exactly, and at 16, I never really experienced an injury before. It was maybe like hurt my ankle, twist my ankle was maybe like the biggest one ever that I'd had up until that point. And when you look back on it now, knowing the things that like I've looked at, like in terms of like transitions from injury and returning from injury and things like that there, you can see like all the different stages that I'd went through at that time. But at the time I
Yeah.
didn't know what they were. I was just
Yeah.
like trying to figure it out as it was going along.
Then kind of on the flip side of that, what is your biggest achievement on or off the pitch?
Then, yeah, I suppose just following on from that was we were able to win back-to-back minor championships at that time. Um, the next year that I come back, like as I said, being in that sort of place, you didn't know if you're going to come back or not, and then being able to come
Yeah.
back and be part of a successful team, something for me is I'll always be able to have and look back on fondly.
And probably going through the injury probably made it that bit sweeter for you to come back and get that success.
Yeah, big time. I think, when you go through a bit of a struggle, the reward is always sweeter. Big time,
Hmm.
definitely.
Yeah. Kind of reflecting back then, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Just go for it. Like, I think when you're at 18, you're sort of afraid of what people think and what people, if you do something different, but at the end of the day, I think the best thing you think is like people don't care that much about you.
Yeah,
Like,
they're too busy worrying about
yeah, like
themselves,
a
maybe.
simple thing, like people don't really care about you or what you're doing. Um, so they don't care if you've decided to take up this sport or if you've decided this is what you want to do for a career. People don't care. They're like, all right,
Yeah.
I'm looking after me. Everybody else, they can do whatever they want. So just go for
Yeah.
it. But it's easier saying that now at 24 than
Ah, yeah.
at 20.
It's easy until you do it. That's
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
thing. I think with Ireland as well, it's like the island or the village mentality. You're following along the path, and by God, if you step out of the path, the whole village
yeah,
knows.
exactly. And it's almost like a fear that these people, suppose, will sort of shun you. But
Yeah.
then once you do something, it's like people be like, don't care, or else be like, oh, how you getting on? It's like, that's actually, like, I
Yeah.
sort of, nearly the usual answer is like, oh, I wish I had done that.
Exactly. Like and I always find the ones that are criticizing you and saying, "Oh, why are you doing that?" and putting you down. They want to do something similar and they're just jealous. They
Yeah,
just don't have the confidence to do it themselves.
exactly. And um, I think a big thing of it is um, I suppose your thoughts and your feelings influence your thoughts, and these influence your actions. I suppose, just to go back to sort of like a idea of cognitive behavioral therapy and that. But you can also influence your feelings with your actions. You don't have to sort of let your feelings dictate your actions. If you sort of take action, you can sort of dictate your feelings, and if you decide to go for it, you'll not look back.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Um if you could have the option again of anybody in the world to have dinner with, who would be your dream guest and why?
Um, I'm going to sort of cheat in this one. I'm going to say Muhammad Ali, even though
Okay,
even
yeah.
though he,
I'll take it. It's okay. I'll take
yeah,
it. Yeah.
take Muhammad Ali. He's just, when you watch back clips of him, like, sort of outstanding performer. But he was sort of, I suppose, the first man ever to really use like visualization, but nobody knew what it was back then. It was like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
knock him out in 4 rounds and things like that there. And it's just
Yeah.
talking himself into um talking it into reality as such. And also sort of the things that he stood for, you know, like black rights and things like that there, at a time when it really wasn't popular. I was actually seeing the clip yesterday of him Parkinson, and he's talking about how he won his gold medal against the
Yeah.
communists, the Russians, and the the Polish, and he went into his local restaurant 3 days later, and they just wouldn't serve him because he was black, and he threw his gold medal in the river, and he went and he made a stand. He didn't fight in the war, because these people, the Vietnamese didn't hurt him, so why should he hurt them? A lot of things that he stood for,
Yeah.
as a sports person, for Ali was, the things he stood for are stuff that we should all stand for in real life. Things to get.
Yeah. And he was probably nearly ahead of his time in terms of, like you were saying, that wasn't nearly the done thing back then. Like, obviously you see at the moment athletes are brilliant for standing up for stuff off the pitch or court or wherever they play. Back then maybe that wasn't as popular. It wasn't the thing that was done.
Exactly, and it cost him 3 or 4 years of the prime of his career. He wouldn't go fight in the
Mm.
war, and
Yeah.
he took his boxing license off him. And for someone, I suppose, with that much um, talent, and to give that talent up, I suppose, to a degree, for something that they thought was bigger than them, bigger than what, like, what their sport was. I think he's just such an interesting person, and just this come up story, and then I suppose going into his ideas and religion and things like that. There, he just seems like such an interesting man.
Yeah. Yeah, you might need to have like a 5-course or 7-course dinner with him to get through everything.
Big time, yeah. Into the bar after as well.
Exactly. My final question is, if your life was a book, what chapter would this be called?
Ooh,
This always stumps people.
This is a tough one. I suppose I'd say like new beginnings or something. I suppose I'm just recently moved back from Toronto, and I'm sort of back in Ireland, and this is me. I'm ready to start my career here, see where we go from here. So I would say, yeah, new starts, maybe 2.0 or 3.0 maybe. But
yeah, there's an unlimited amount of new starts.
Yeah, I would say new starts.
Brilliant. Eddie, thanks a million for coming on. I really appreciate it. If you're listening to the podcast, be sure to check out Sports Performance Thoughts over on Instagram. Eddie posts some really, really good stuff, so make sure to give him a follow. Eddie, I really appreciate it, and I want to wish you the best of luck with everything in the future.
Not a problem. Thank you very much, Laura, for having me. Great.
A big thanks to Eddie for coming on today. Be sure to check out his Instagram page at Sports Performance Thoughts for more. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you did enjoy the episode, be sure to leave a rating and a review, as it does help the podcast to grow. If you are interested in setting up your own podcast, be sure to get in touch with the Primal Productions team over on Instagram at Primal Pro. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.